Thanks everyone for coming. Indeed, it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Immorlica today. Nicole did her PhD at MIT. In fact, I think all her degrees are at MIT. She did a postdoc at Microsoft Research, was a professor at Northwestern University, was doing incredibly well. Microsoft got very fond of her, gave her a faculty fellowship, and then rehired her back at Microsoft. So she's currently in the Microsoft New England lab. She's done groundbreaking work in theory and computer science, and now she's branched out and doing work in many, many different areas. Her work has had impact in algorithmic game theory, social networks, and a variety of areas. I've been very impressed seeing her work for the last 10 years or so. And I just wanted to say that when we were discussing what talk she might give here, she sent me many, many abstracts. And so if you don't like the talk, blame it on me. I ended up choosing one of the abstracts which I thought might be of interest to a broad audience, but really I was deeply impressed by the variety of work that she's done, both in theoretical computer science and work in algorithmic game theory and AI. She's done work in online algorithms, offline algorithms, you name it. Almost every sub-area of anything related to algorithms, you start searching, her name comes up as somebody who's done really amazing work in that area. So without further ado, Nicole Immorlica. Today she'll be talking about the emergent structure of simple behaviors in complex networks.
Thanks very much. So as Samir mentioned, I work in a variety of areas related to the intersection of economics and computer science, mostly motivated by social and environmental issues. So if you're interested in any problems in those domains, I'd be very happy to hear from you and discuss my work related to these things. And today I'm going to talk about social networks, which is a social phenomenon that's particularly interesting to me. So the human condition is fundamentally a networked one. Many important games that govern human behavior are played in a network context as defined by our social, geographical, and business relationships. Here, for example, is a network of people related to humanity, studying humanity, as represented by pages on Wikipedia and the links between them. The colors correspond to communities as determined by a community detection algorithm. So for example, the red nodes are psychologists, the green nodes represent people looking at religion and spirituality, and you can see the very large nodes in these pictures are famous people from these fields. And what you can observe is that you get people like Freud having been influenced from scientists like Kant and Russell, who in turn were influenced by philosophers like Aristotle and Kierkegaard. And so you have a whole network of individuals whose behavior and opinions and ideas are influenced by the network structure in which they exist. And also, they influence the network structure itself. So these ideas co-evolve with the network links. In networks...
Back up 1 second, I'm still trying to understand this graph. So the nodes are simply...
The nodes are pages on Wikipedia.
Okay.
And the links are links between the pages. But I'm thinking about this as being representative of the flow of ideas between the people that these pages are talking about. And so in networks, in network settings, agents interact in a local manner, often according to simple behavioral norms. So for example, I will look at agents in one part of this talk as being nodes on a graph, and they're interacting with each other by playing by matrix games with each of their neighbors. And in every round of interaction, they pick some action that they will take in all of the bimatrix games. So this bimatrix game could be something like a prisoner's dilemma game, where I have to decide whether to cooperate with all of my neighbors or to get some sort of mutual gain, or defect on all of my neighbors for some greater personal gain. And I want to study what sort of behavior arises as a result of these local interactions. Oftentimes, the behavior that arises is going to be something of global consequence and give rise to some emergent structure. So I have here a movie. Let's see if I can play it. This is a simulation of an example of segregation. So every node in this graph is an individual that's either blue or red. And an individual is assumed to be unhappy in a neighborhood if they're a minority in that neighborhood. So in the dynamics, at every point in time, we take two individuals uniformly at random, and if they're both oppositely colored and unhappy, meaning minorities in their local neighborhoods, they swap homes. And what we see is that when we started out in a random configuration and everything looked very integrated, as we ran the dynamics, we ended up in a configuration like this, which appears to have some emergent global structure, which you could think about as being a story of how cities, for example, segregate according to along racial divides, even though nobody is inherently racist. They just want to not be a small minority in their own neighborhood. So in this talk, I'm going to discuss emergent phenomena, like the one in the last slide, due to local interactions in a networked context. And I'm going to give 3 vignettes. One is looking at cooperation. So why do societies tend to cooperate even when you could just defect in all of your relationships and get a large personal gain? What sustains cooperation in society? The second example will be segregation, as we saw in the last slide. So can I look at a dynamics model of segregation and understand what degree of segregation might we expect to see in a city? And the third example will be learning. So I will look at a social network and see how the ideas sort of flood through the social network. When is it the case that the majority belief will eventually be adopted by all the agents in the community? So let's jump right in with my first example, which is cooperation. It's clear that members of a community tend to cooperate with one another despite strong incentives not to. So you can think about online communities, say like playing online games or sharing economy websites and things like this, where you could pretty cheaply cheat in your relationships for a large personal gain, and it doesn't really have a strong consequence because you have a degree of anonymity online. Nobody knows you're a dog on the internet. And therefore, you have no incentive. I mean, people try to fix this with reputation mechanisms, but they're theoretically largely broken. So there must be something else that's sustaining cooperation or nice behavior in these online communities. And this is one piece of the story. What we'll see is that cooperation can be sustained, it can be explained by the formation of social capital. So the idea is that the network links co-evolve with the behavior, and if you're a nice person, you're going to build up more friendships over your lifetime, and therefore you have more opportunities to gain from your relationships. And this social capital that you've acquired by being nice is costly to destroy because it took you a long time to build up those friendships. And this is going to be what sustains cooperation in our model. This is joint work with Brendan Lucier and Brian Rogers. The first piece appeared in EC 2010, and we're now adding some new results and submitting a journal version to Review of Economic Studies. So here's the model. I want to study cooperation. So the standard model for studying cooperation in economics is the so-called prisoner's dilemma game. It assumes it's a bi-matrix game, which means that it's a game played between two people. We have a row player on the left and a column player on the top. The row player can choose to either cooperate or defect on the column player. And similarly, the column player can choose to either cooperate or defect on the row player. If both cooperate, then they both get a payoff of 1. If the row player cooperates but the column player defects, we're in the upper right cell of the matrix, then the row player gets a payoff of minus B, so he's hurt by some amount B. And the column player gets a gain of A over what he would have gotten if he had cooperated. So he gets an extra $8 by defecting on a cooperator. And symmetrically for when the row player defects and the column player cooperates. And then if both defect, then they both get a payoff of 0. And so the interesting thing about this game is that if I take the right setting of parameters, then the socially efficient thing is for both players to cooperate. The total gain to society is maximized. It's $2 when both cooperate, but in any other cell of the matrix it's less. And yet, despite these strong global incentives to cooperate, any individual has a very strong incentive to defect. And why is that? Well, if you're the column player, let's say, in this game, if your partner, the row player, cooperates, you would get a higher payoff by defecting. Similarly, if your row player defects, you also get a higher payoff by defecting. So no matter what your row player does, your partner does, you prefer to defect.
Yeah. The payoff depends on the existence of cooperators within them.
So this is like, you can think about this as just a two-person game right now. I'll extend it to a network in a moment. And there, at the outset is no notion of a cooperator. It's just a single-shot game. Your partner might cooperate, your partner might defect. And in a single shot of this game, there's no reason anyone would ever cooperate. Say a rational agent would ever cooperate. There's a dominant strategy to defect. So indeed, as you bring up, one of the interesting questions is why might we see cooperation strategies in these games? And you can, in fact, economists play these in the lab, and they do see people cooperate for a while before they start defecting. Like if I tell you you're going to go to the lab and you're going to play 100 rounds of this game, people will cooperate for like up to 90 of them because they're getting $1 every time they and their partner cooperate. And then towards the end, they might start defecting and try to get a few of those extra $80 by defecting when their partner hadn't quite yet switched to the defection strategy. So why do we see that type of cooperation? One explanation in a repeated setting, like if you play a bunch of these repeatedly in a lab, would be this Pulp Theorem, which applies to repeated games very generally, which says that I can achieve any point in the payoff space by so there's an equilibrium in which we have a prescribed set of actions, and if you, my partner, ever deviate from that prescribed set of actions, I commit to punishing you forevermore by defecting from that day on. And so if agents are sufficiently patient, this can sustain cooperation for quite some time. In a network setting, so now I'm having agents play these cooperation, these prisoner dilemmas games on every link in their social network, but they have to take the same action in all of these games. Then I can again explain, there are some studies trying to explain cooperation in these network settings. And one nice paper, for example, is this Contagious grim trigger. I can't do this punishment thing I did in the repeated setting because the repeated setting was bilateral, so there was only one other partner. And so I could punish that guy if he did something bad. But in a network setting, if I want to punish one person, I'm forced to punish all of my partners as well. And so that leads to this idea of a contagious grim trigger, which is if I ever see a defection on any of my partners, I'll defect with everybody. So if one person wakes up on the wrong side of the bed someday, the whole society collapses and starts defecting. And the threat of that happening forces people to stay cooperative. Okay, so there's also work in the CS community on reputation mechanisms to sustain cooperation in networks, and this has been very important work in making websites like eBay work. In fact, they won the 10-year, the paper that started this research, Resnick et al. Won the 10-year prize at EC last year, I believe. And then there's some work in the economics community saying that another thing that helps sustain cooperation is having penalties for new relationships. So if you have to invest something, it takes some cost to develop a relationship, then you don't want to destroy it by defecting on your partner because that's painful. You would then have to pay this cost again to develop a new relationship. Okay, so this is some of the prior work, but one issue with all of this prior work is that I can only explain full cooperation. So what you might expect in online networks is to see some kind of partial cooperation, like some people cooperate and some don't. And also that work is very brittle, like the grim trigger strategy. If somebody trembles, then the whole society collapses. So in our work, we are going to show that through this social capital story, which is a result of the coevolution of the network and the behavior, we can sustain partial cooperation in a stable equilibrium for a large range of parameters. So let me give you the model. I have a social network, and every day a series of events happen in which the main event is that people play these prisoner dilemmas games. So first I have some sort of population churn. Agents die with some probability, 1 minus delta, and when an agent dies, new agents are born to replace the dead. So this sort of population churn is akin to a discount factor, and it's important in trying to get the agents to trade off their short-term gain for their long-term gain. And we can study, as delta approaches 0 to get agents that are as delta approaches 1 to get agents that are fully patient, or intermediate ranges of delta as well.
But these new agents go on, what are their links?
So I'm after the population churn, agents get to form relationships. And so an agent, I'm going to assume that it's costly to sponsor a relationship. That's why the links in this picture are directed. So agents with less than some model parameter k sponsored relationships can propose new relationships. And so agents can, that have less than k relationships propose new relationships. And now agents that receive proposals, there's no bound on the number of in-links you can have, because I'm thinking to propose a relationship with you, I have to go into the work to court you and become your friend. But for you, it's not any work. So you can have as many in-links as you want. So for every proposal you get, you can either accept or reject it. So maybe the agent in the center received one proposal and made one proposal. Maybe he accepted the proposal he received, and the proposal he made was rejected. Okay? So in the next part of the game is where we see the cooperation show up. So agents are going to play this prisoner's dilemma game, and based on whether people were nice or mean, they can potentially sever links to some partners. So, for example, the game is played in the chaos to realize maybe the center agent decided to cooperate, and 2 of his neighbors cooperated and 2 of his neighbors defected. And then because those defectors caused him to lose some payoff, maybe he decides in the last step of the game to sever his links to those defectors. And then those links disappear. So that's the structure of the game that I'm studying. You'll notice it has some key features. Every day people are playing this prisoner's dilemma game, taking the same action on all of their links. And so that's the notion of cooperation. I'm trying to study what fraction of the society plays cooperate strategies in these prisoner's dilemma games. And every day, the network changes a little bit, either due to death or severance of relationships. And that's the notion of social capital. So here, social capital would be the number of relationships you're involved in. Yeah?
What information do nodes have about other nodes that try to propose relationships?
Yeah, so that's very important. There's no information about other nodes, so I don't know the identity. I know if we've been in a relationship for the past 10 days, I know how you've behaved in those past 10 days. But I do not know when I meet you anything about you, about your past play. So I'm looking at it
have like unique IDs?
No.
So if I sever the link with somebody and then they propose one again, I don't know that that's the person I just cut off last time.
We're looking at a continuum of agents, so that won't happen with probability 1, but that is correct.
And you don't model not getting caught. What do you?
Getting caught?
Yeah, if somebody decides to do something nasty, but the other person does not know it.
Oh yeah, there's a complete observability of actions here, so I can tell that you defected because I see my payoff in the game we play.
In real life,
Yeah, you can certainly abstract the model to include all sorts of other details. I'm trying to look at a very bare bones model and see if I can get cooperation even in this very bare bones model, which is in both of the extensions you guys have suggested, it's harder to get cooperation here than in those extensions. Yes?
So do you apply these actions in some interleaved arbitrary way, or do you first do like all the actions?
Everything's synchronous.
And
then I repeat this many days in a row.
in the order 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
5. So you first apply 1 to all, then no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So do defectors necessarily defect across all their ties, or do you do this?
Yes, you have to, that's the notion of network here, is that I'm playing the same action on all of my links. So you can think about it as like, every day I have to pick a, say, quality level if I'm a producer of some good. That's the good, I'm selling bad apples today. Okay, so in this network, there's a very simple behavior that turns out to be a stable equilibrium. And this simple behavior is quite interesting. Agents are going to be consistent in the sense that at birth, they're going to choose to either always cooperate or always defect. And they make this choice by flipping a coin with probability Q. Furthermore, and this is new to the journal version of this paper, agents are going to accept in-links with some probability. So that is cooperators. Defectors, of course, always accept in-links because they always do better by having a relationship. But a cooperator might want to reject an in-link if the cooperator feels it's likely to have come from a defector, which they can estimate based on the parameters of the model. And so I'm going to let cooperators accept in-links probabilistically. So there's some probability P that a cooperator accepts an in-link. There's no reason to, this accept probability should be uniform across my links because of my anonymity assumption. I don't know anything about the agent, so they're as likely to be a cooperator. One agent's as likely to be a cooperator as another one. So I just need one parameter here. Now, this is given this specification P and Q, and this assumption of consistency, the remaining strategic actions an agent takes into this game are completely determined. If you know that people are consistent, in other words, someone decides at birth to defect always, then you know if someone defects on you today, they're going to defect on you tomorrow. So certainly you should break the link to that person. Similarly, if someone cooperates with you today, you know they'll cooperate with you tomorrow, and therefore you should maintain the link to that person. And so the link management, or the social capital aspect of the story, is determined by the consistency of the behaviors. Okay, so when is such a thing in equilibrium in my system? Can I say something about the fraction of cooperation based on in this equilibrium? Yeah?
What about two defectors that are neighbors? When they both defect, they both sever ties from each other?
Yeah, they'll sever ties from each other because they'd rather, one of them sponsored that link, and that one would rather go look for a new person who might get the cooperator game. So in order to understand the fraction of cooperation, which is Q, in the society, and the exclusivity of the cooperators, which is P, I need to see when an agent, which PQ pairs could be in equilibrium of my system. And in order to do so, here I've plotted all potential PQ pairs for, and I'm looking at this blue curve, which studies if everybody else in the society was playing this PQ pair, how would I feel about accepting in links if I were a cooperator? And this blue curve is the PQ pairs for which I'm indifferent between accepting links as a cooperator. Similarly, this red curve is where I'm indifferent between cooperating at birth. And the shapes of these curves are the same no matter what the parameters are, but I've drawn these curves for a specific set of parameters in my model in which the gain on defecting on a cooperator is 2.7. The pain of cooperating with a defector is 1.9, and the patience or death rate is delta is 0.99. So let's try to understand these curves. Why is the blue curve shaped like this, or why is the red curve shaped like this? So I'm claiming that if the PQ pairs in here, inside this blob, you would rather cooperate. And for the PQ pairs, if everybody else was cooperator with probability Q and accepting in links probability P for some PQ pair outside this red blob, you would rather be a defector at birth. And why does that make sense, that shape? Well, certainly if there are very few cooperators in the world, then I'd rather defect. So you would expect people over here to prefer to defect. If there are very many cooperators in the world, then would I prefer to defect or cooperate? Now it's a little bit, you have a trade-off. Because if you defect, you're going to get a payoff of 1 per outlink per round every day, and you're never going to have any inlinks. If you cooperate, then over your lifetime, you're eventually going to build up inlinks. If you defect, you're going to get a payoff of 1 plus A per day per outlink. If you cooperate, you're going to get a payoff of 1 per day per link, minus some pain from the defectors. So the question is, how many outlinks are you going to build up over your lifetime? Well, by some kind of averaging argument, everybody's throwing out k outlinks every day. So if all the cooperators eventually find each other, I'll have 2k links. And so I'll get at most double the payoff of a defector. So most double the number of links as a defector. So if A is greater than 1, then I'd rather defect if there are a lot of cooperators. And the cooperators are always accepting in links. Now, what's interesting is that by being a little bit exclusive, I can get a region where people prefer to cooperate because the cooperators are exclusive. So what does being exclusive do? If cooperators are exclusive, then they're rejecting inlinks with probability P, which decreases the pain of cooperating with a defector in expectation by a P factor, and decreases the benefit of defecting on a cooperator by a P factor. And so essentially, the cooperators are doing more search, and so I'm more likely to see links coming from cooperators because they have to search more to find someone to cooperate with, and therefore I get a whole region in here where people prefer to cooperate because of this exclusivity parameter. Similarly, we can reason about the blue curve. Certainly, if there are very few cooperators in the world, then links are likely to come from defectors, and so I prefer to reject an inlink. On the other hand, if there are very many cooperators in the world, I prefer to accept because the links are likely to come from a cooperator. Or if cooperators are a bit exclusive, then again, cooperators are doing more search, so links are more likely to come from cooperators, and so I accept. Okay, so now that we've discussed the shapes of these curves, we can think about the equilibria. So the equilibria are the points at which these curves cross, or all defect. All defects are always in equilibrium. But the points at which these curves cross, everybody is happy with this PQ. Playing PQ is the best response to playing PQ because you're indifferent, so you're happy to mix. And so the 2 points where these curves cross is an equilibrium. And what's really nice is we can show there's a unique stable equilibrium, and this involves looking at the algebraic formulas for these curves. And this stable equilibrium here is stable in the sense that if we're at that equilibrium and society shifts a little bit towards having too much cooperation with respect to that equilibrium, it will self-correct because the newborns are going to be in the region where they prefer to defect. So if we move to the right, and so they'll push you back to the equilibrium. And similarly, if we get too much acceptance of inlinks, it'll self-correct. So what we've seen is that this model predicts in a stable equilibrium partial cooperation, and indeed there are many details of the model, and in all of my research there are many details of the model that you could say like, well, what about tweaking it in this way or that way? But what I'm interested in here is the sort of intuitive story that cooperation is sustained through this buildup of social capital. And that one thing that's important for this that you might want to consider as a designer is allowing network churn and links to sustain over time and to be broken endogenously. Yes?
If you don't do the actions in a synchronized way, do you have any idea how it would affect this?
I don't think that's going to be a big deal. Like, I mean, it's a little hard for me to think about what it means to not take the actions in a synchronized way because my payoff is only realized when both of us have played in the Prisoner's Dilemma game. So
before you take your next action, you kind of need to know what your neighbor did. Yeah.
Oh yeah, or otherwise that.
But they don't have to be
action-
synchronized. But you just need to know that information.
Yeah.
Is the other equilibrium unstable?
The other equilibrium is unstable. Okay, so it depends on how you define stability. But in this notion of, in this equilibrium, if I perturb a little bit this way, then the newborns are going to want to cooperate, so it's going to push me even more this way. And I'm going to fly off to the right, or fly. So yeah. Okay, so I want to move on to the second example that I have here, which is about segregation. If you're, fell asleep, you can wake up again because this is a new topic.
So I have a question. Is there any extension where people are allowed to play differently with different neighbors, or nobody's looked at that?
No, sure. If you're allowed to play completely differently with different neighbors, I've reduced it. You're back in a bilateral world. And if there's some sort of
Pattern.
coordination that's not exact but partial, then you're moving closer to the world that I was looking at, and you can be in any intermediate range. Okay, so I'm very interested in social issues, as I mentioned, and one very important social issue facing the U.S. today is segregation. So you see a lot of cities, D.C. is a wonderful example, a terrible example, where you have white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods, and they don't seem to mix. And so, in the economist Thomas Schelling proposed a model to study segregation in cities, in which individuals don't necessarily want to be a minority, aren't necessarily racist in the sense that they want to be a majority in their neighborhood, but they simply don't want to be a minority in their own local neighborhood. So everybody would be perfectly happy in an integrated world. And this might not be what's really going on in society, but could society sustain integration if everybody was happy to be in an integrated neighborhood where it was perfectly integrated, so 50-50. And so the model that he proposed, we'll see, has people, if they're unhappy, if they're a minority, they're going to try and move. And they'll want to move to a neighborhood where they're a majority. And what we'll see is that this can cause segregation, and indeed Schelling observed this by simulations involving 70 nodes. That what happens is that there's going to be neighborhoods that in the random initial configuration and integrated state have a slight imbalance towards being, say, I'm going to use red and blue instead of black and white to be a little more PC. So there's a slightly more blue neighborhood. I guess that's not very PC these days. Anyway, there's a slightly more blue neighborhood, and so this slight imbalance causes the neighborhood to tip to being entirely blue as all the red guys flee from the neighborhood. And then this blue neighborhood can expand and expand and expand. So this could cause segregation. But what we'll show is that because the initial configuration is, if the initial configuration is random, these waves of immigration can't expand very far. And what you're going to get is segregation, but on a local scale, not a global scale. So you'll get a bunch of neighborhoods that are segregated. You'll have the, the Chinatown and Little Italy and everything, but they're going to be intermixed throughout the city. So on a global scale, it'll look integrated. Yeah?
Is there a reason why you assume that minority
Indeed, there are studies that look at changing this parameter, and it's an interesting thing to consider. It's just, as a starting point, it looks like a place where you should be able to sustain integration, because on average, people are happy with people are happy to be integrated. And I will mention what happens as you change this threshold. But let me first show you that, and this is the model that Schelling introduced with minority being unhappy. So let me study that basic model first. So I have a society, let's say that there are n people in this society, and there's two types of nodes. I'm going to look at a society in which everybody lives on a ring. It's interesting to study higher dimensional lattices, as like say a grid might better represent a city. And I have some work on that as well, and that was the picture I showed you at the beginning of the talk. But for the first paper I have on this, I was studying a ring lattice, and this was the one that Schelling started with as well. In this ring, I am going to define the neighborhood of a node to be the W nearest neighbors on either side. And then I count himself. So I have an odd number of people in my neighborhood, 2W plus 1. So there's a clear minority, a clear majority. I am going to say that a person is happy if at least a tau fraction of his neighbors are of the same type. So in answer to your question, if tau is less than 0.5, I'm happy being in a minority. I could say maybe I'm happy being in a 40% minority, but not a 39% minority. And I can study the impact of varying tau on the segregation that results in this dynamic. And so the important parameters, but for this part of the talk, I'll focus on tau being 0.5, and hence the important parameters are going to be the window size W, or the neighborhood, like how sensitive I am to people on either side of me, how far I look down the block to consider whether I'm a minority or not, and the size of the society N. And what I want to understand is segregation like order W or order N. And to make that make sense, of course, I have to define what I mean by segregation and how I measure it. So let me do that. First, I'm going to tell you about the dynamics. So every day, I select two individuals at random. Let's say, for example, these guys. And if they're both oppositely colored and unhappy, then they're going to swap spots. So that blue guy there, this is his local neighborhood. He's a minority, so he's unhappy. The red guy there, that's his local neighborhood. He's also a minority, so he's unhappy. And so I'm going to take these two guys and have them swap spots. Notice since they were oppositely colored, they become happy in each other's homes. So as I repeat these dynamics, I could converge to a variety of states. Can anybody guess what's a stable configuration according to these dynamics?
Complete segregation.
You.
Completely segregated.
Completely segregated. So half red, half blue. Anything else?
Completely intermixed.
Completely intermixed. Every other thing is red and blue. That would definitely work. So that one is unlikely to ever happen because there's always going to be several people in a row in the initial configuration that are the same color. So sort of the smallest thing that has a non-zero probability of happening as the society grows large is that one over there, where I have alternating segments of length W plus 1. And so we'll call this complete or global segregation because sort of the size of the segregated neighborhoods in this world are n over 2. And I'll call this local segregation because the size of the neighborhoods in this segregated world are like W, order W.
Is there a cost to the movement?
Is there a what? Cost to moving? No, there's no cost to moving in this model. And agents are like, moving stochastically, so it's not really like a strategic decision. Yeah?
Isn't everybody unhappy in the top right? We're looking at two
But did you change W?
Yeah, W is 1 in this picture.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Okay, so measure of segregation is going to be the weighted average run length. So I'm going to take a random node and I'm going to ask what's the length of the largest monochromatic segment containing him in the final configuration. And So in prior work, Schelling's original paper in the late 60s, early 70s showed that for, using sort of pennies on a table and flipping them over from heads to tails, he showed that for N70 and W4, the segregation was 12, which I don't know how to interpret this. It's like 12 is neither 35 nor 5, so but that's what he got. Then Young introduced a notion of perturbed analysis. So this is a Markov chain, and it's hard to analyze because it has sync states. But you could perturb the dynamics a little bit by having people make mistakes with some small probability, and then it becomes a nicely behaved Markov chain, and you can analyze it. And doing that, he showed that you get to global segregation is inevitable in this model. And what we did is we came up with a technique based on some sophisticated linkage of differential equations to Markov chains of Wormald to be able to analyze the exact dynamics that Schelling proposed, and we show that we get a linear segregation. After our paper, someone looked at varying tau, and what's very interesting here is that you think as people get more tolerant, so if you're happier to be in a minority neighborhood, you should get more integration. But in fact, what happens is you get exponential sized integration as opposed to linear at 1/2. And so this is surprising at first, but it's actually quite intuitive, because what happens is as you become more tolerant in the initial random configuration, almost everybody's happy and they're complacent, even if they're in a neighborhood that's slightly more the other color. And so they're exponentially far apart. There are neighborhoods that are so extremely the other color that people are not happy. Those people move away, starting some wave of immigration. And this wave of immigration just sweeps over all those complacent people that were happy in the initial configuration. There's nothing to stop this wave of configuration except another wave of configuration. And they're exponentially far apart, so they create a lot of segregation. But as I said, in our model, we can show that the segregation is linear. And the way that all of these results follow is the definition of what we call a firewall. So what you'll notice is that any sequence of W+1 consecutive individuals of the same type is going to be happy no matter what happens in the dynamics. They're never ever going to move. If I ever come across a situation in which W+1 blue people live next door to each other, they've got their community and they're done. And why is that? Well, even the guy that's most likely to be unhappy in this little segment here, say all the way on the left, has W neighbors like him to the right. And so no matter, even if everybody on his left was red, he would be fine. Okay? So these things never move. Well, in the initial configuration, since everybody is red or blue with probability 1/2, every 2 to the W sites, I'm going to have one of these things. Right? And so the segregation can be at most the distance between these things, because they're never going to move, so you can't get a blue segment to cross over 2 red things that appeared in the initial configuration. 2 red firewalls in the initial configuration. And so that already proves that segregation can't be global. It can be at most exponential in W. But that's a pretty high bound. And so in order to decrease that to something like linear in W, what we're going to show is that these firewall type configurations emerge as the dynamics progress. And why do they emerge? Well, they get born in what we call firewall incubators. So you have a little firewall incubator, which is an area that's a little bit more heavily red than blue, but not so much more heavily red than blue that it's rare in the initial configuration. It's something like 1 standard deviation more red than blue. And therefore, they're pretty frequent in the initial configuration, and we can show through this connection to this differential equation technology that these things are likely to turn into firewalls. And you can see this in the following simulation. So you can pick some part that looks a little bit more red than blue, say, and watch as it grows. You can see that neighborhood becomes more and more extreme until it just became all that color. And so here you have your emergent structure, this intermingling of segregated neighborhoods in an integrated global world. Yeah?
So it seems like these design walls depend on people being happy if the majority of their neighborhood is the same color that they are. And if they want 60 or 70% of the neighborhood to be the same color as they are, you wouldn't get these firewalls.
For sure, yeah. So that tolerance parameter, it's a little hard for me to define. I didn't report, people have studied when you want 60% like you. So it's a little hard to define the dynamics there, because now if I'm red and unhappy and you're blue and unhappy and we swap houses, we could still be unhappy in each other's houses. So there's I didn't want to get into how to define the dynamics in that setting, but people have studied that, and there's this beautiful simulation that I taught in my class, looking at where they let you tweak all these different parameters. I highly encourage you to check it out. I can give Samir the link if you're interested.
So, I mean, it may be much harder to analyze, but it seems like that's much more realistic, because it seems like in real life, what you have are people who maybe are comfortable with some integration, but they don't want too much.
For sure, there's, if I want to work towards reality, there's going to be issues like that, and there's going to be issues like, rivers and train tracks and stuff that make me not so sensitive to somebody on some side, and then there's going to be school districts, and so this is definitely a very stylized model. It's an important model in economics because it shows this micro motives emerging to macro behavior, and it also, sort of at a bare bones level, where you think you could support integration, could you really? It's kind of a hypothetical question I'm interested in. Yeah?
So I have a question in opposite direction. So suppose tau is less than half, then most people are going to be happy initially. Then because your polynomial convergence time doesn't get much faster than that.
It's going to be polynomial convergence time. I don't know if it, for sure, that's an upper bound. I don't know a lower bound. You need at least linear, I think, because you're going to need to, the end state is going to be pretty much half blue, half red. So almost everybody needs to change at least once. And then I guess it's going to need to be something like n log n, because I need to do some kind of coupon collector to hit everybody enough times that they have a chance to move.
So the analysis in your work is specific to tau equals half?
This work is specific to tau equals half. There's a follow-up paper that does tau less than a half. And now that I say it, I think you can show via potential function argument that the convergence time is going to be like order n log n for any setting of tau. Yeah?
Have you run this with more than 2 types?
So this simulation I mentioned in this teaching platform runs it with 3 types, and things get more complicated, and now you have to talk about the ratios of the different types to each other. So yeah, I don't have any theoretical results for sure in that direction. What I do have theoretical results about, though, is on the grid. We have a new SOTA paper upcoming in SOTA 2017 showing that for tau less than a half, you get exponential segregation. And notice that the grid is significantly harder than the ring, and that's why we started with the ring, because this notion of firewall doesn't translate so well to the grid. There's because you can get impacted from all directions. So it's hard to define a shape that's stable in a sea of the other color in a grid. Okay, so I have 1/3 example. I think I will skip parts of it, but let me just give you the setup. This example is about aggregating and spreading beliefs. So I want to understand, okay, so one of the things that's been bugging me since grad school is there are so many papers showing that so many different examples of social networks, or even networks in nature, tend to have certain structures, like power law degree distribution, sparsity, expansiveness, and I was always wondering why. What process is the world optimizing such that this is the answer? This network structure is the answer. And so this paper is trying to sort of address that question. And one answer to that question is that these properties are effective at aggregating and spreading beliefs. And that's because the sparsity means that people in different parts of the network are forming independent opinions. And then the expansiveness means that these independent opinions can spread globally. So when people are forming independent opinions, it's like you're running a bunch of little independent experiments, and the majority experiment is, like, the correct answer is more likely to turn out in a majority of these independent experiments. So a majority of the experiments come up with the correct answer, and then the expansiveness lets this correct answer spread everywhere. So you could imagine questions with a binary choice, like, you know, should I vaccinate my child against polio? A lot of rural parts of the world have beliefs that polio, or even in the US, I guess, that vaccinations are harmful, and so should you vaccinate your child against polio? Yes or no? And so a bunch of people form beliefs about it, and the question is, when do we reach a consensus on the majority belief? So in this model, there's two states of the world, blue and red, and agents have a belief. Let's say that blue is the correct belief. Here, I'm not trying to be PC anymore. And so you believe the correct thing with probability half plus delta, and otherwise you believe red. And these are independent. And agents have initially no publicly announced opinions. The publicly announced opinions are updated over time. They're updated by a simple dynamic in which I repeatedly select a random agent and update the opinion of the random agent to the majority of the neighbor's reports, letting the agent break the tie with his own belief. So in this example, if I have the top node move first, he has no neighbors with any report, and so he's going to report his own belief, red, as his opinion. Then I ask the bottom node, and he reports blue. The node on the left now has two neighbors with announced reports, red and blue, and they are tied, so he copies his own belief, blue. And then the guy on the right has a majority blue neighbors, and so he reports blue, even though his own belief is red. So his opinion is now blue. So I'm making my opinion match the majority of my neighbors. And I might get asked multiple times, and the dynamics stop when it converges. And the question is, when do I converge on everybody's opinion matching the underlying majority belief? And the result that we see is that we will reach consensus on this underlying majority belief with high probability when the network is sparse. So in our paper, sparse means bounded max degree. Of course, that rules out power law networks, but we believe that the results should hold for other definitions of sparsity that power law networks would satisfy. We just haven't been able to prove it. And expansive means second eigenvalue bounded away from 1. And the way this happens is that the bounded degree allows a bunch of neighborhoods independently to form opinions which are a collection of their neighbors' opinions, and therefore are likely to be blue because this is some Boolean function, and the output of this Boolean function is more likely to match the majority of its inputs. And so the expected number of agents with a blue opinion is going to be large, and then we have to do some trickery to show that the variance is small. And then the way we get consensus is now that all these like sort of independent neighborhoods most of them have ended up forming a blue opinion. Now, as I ask people, because of expansiveness, I'm more likely to have more blue neighbors than red neighbors, and therefore the expansiveness causes this majority to spread. It's like a biased random walk, and we're going to get a majority blue with that kind of state. So that last section was fast. I know I didn't quite get a chance to tell you the model, but the intuition is that the sparsity allows me to do some sort of local aggregation experiments in which I'm more likely to match the underlying, the outcome of the experiment is more likely to be blue than red. And then the expansiveness lets me spread that information globally. Yeah?
Changing one's opinion based on the majority of one's neighbors is sometimes referred to as conformance transmission. There are several other transmission models, and I was wondering if you've looked at any of them.
I have not looked at any of them. Forming according to the majority is certainly a simple, sort of naive thing. There are models, and it's like almost myopic in some sense if my payoff is some kind of coordination game, right? There's models that look at a more of a complete rationality assumption in which I do some sort of Bayesian updating on what I think the underlying true bit is based on the reports of all of my neighbors and what I know about the network structure. And here you can get things like information cascades, which have been used to explain various bubbles and stuff like that. So you can imagine a situation in which the first few reports are the minority report, and then you, let's say in a complete network, then you rationally, even if you see like your own signal is the majority signal, you believe that the minority signal is the majority one because you've seen a few people heard on that thing. And this leads to really cool classroom experiments where you can get your students to herd on the wrong thing, which are fun to play. Yeah?
About this whole content filtering phenomenon with, like on Facebook, for example, you're more likely to see things that confirm your own beliefs based on what you post. Have you done anything that's related to that?
Yeah, so there's very interesting work looking at whether the internet connects us all more, so does that make us more like integrated or more like segregated because we can go live in our little like leftist or rightist holes, right? And so this sort of suggests that like we're all going to eventually hear the majority and conform to it. I know of work that's actually looking at the data, trying to, from Facebook kind of disputing this view, or from not Facebook kind of suggesting it's a problem. But my intuition is that in general, the internet actually integrates us more than it segregates us. And, okay, so that's all I have.
Questions? So I just wanted to make one observation. So Thomas Schelling, by the way, is a Nobel laureate who's a retired professor at University of Maryland.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know how many of you knew that. I just want to throw that out.
I'm always nervous he's going to show up to one of my talks.
Well, I was hoping he'd show up. But anyway, thank you so much for a wonderful talk.